We've made some counter proposals, which they're aware, and the time will come to really roll up our sleeves. It's not a case of the United States dictates the terms. We have the negotiation. We can come to a mutually successful outcome.
The Prime Minister says Canada is aware of American trade complaints, but Conservatives suggest Mark Carney has lost his grip on the situation. House Leader Andrew Scheer says Carney's already made concessions in the interests of advancing trade talks.
Mark Carney needs to explain what he got in return for the leverage that he gave up this year. Remember, he unilaterally dropped reciprocal tariffs. He then dropped the digital services tax. It seems to me that from what you're suggesting that he got nothing in return for that.
But the Prime Minister appeared dismissive of Conservative complaints about his negotiations.
On your Poilievre saying you need to explain your plan to Canadians on trade talks. He says you're showboating too much. You need to stop the YouTube videos.
Yeah, when's he ever negotiated?
Donald Trump just threw down a pretty bold demand. He basically said Canada needs to pay an entry fee up front before he'll even sit down for serious talks on CUSMA. And Mark Carney? He looked at that and said no. While Mexico jumped in quickly and agreed to start formal talks on May 25th in Mexico City, Canada held its ground. No rush, no upfront giveaways. And what's really interesting is that seasoned trade watchers are calling this a smart move, not a weak one. Let's break down what actually happened this week, why Mexico's hurry might actually highlight Canada's stronger position, and what Trump's own trade people accidentally revealed about who's really holding the cards here. We're sitting at about 63 days until July 1st, and that clock is ticking. But Canada seems to be the only one at this table that's not panicking about it. So let's start with this so-called entry fee, because it's really setting the tone for everything. From what multiple senior sources are saying, the Trump team wants Canada to make some big concessions before negotiations even officially begin. Not during the talks, but before they even walk into the room. Think things like changes to dairy supply management, digital rules, procurement policies, liquor boards, and rules around Chinese inputs in supply chains. It's a long list, and they want movement on it up front. Former Quebec Premier Jean Charest, who's now advising Carney on these files, confirmed it publicly. He said the Americans are looking for a lot of concessions just to get Canada to the table. One U.S. official even joked about it like buying a Costco membership. You pay first, then you get to shop. But Canadian officials pushed back, saying once you've paid that membership, you shouldn't have to keep paying extra just to walk down the aisles. Canada's response has been consistent. No. Everything gets discussed, but as part of a full package deal, not as gifts handed over beforehand. Foreign Minister LeBlanc put it straight. Ottawa isn't going to agree to things that hurt Canadian workers and businesses just to earn a seat at the table. It's a firm but reasonable stance. Now, let's look at the contrast with Mexico, because this is where things get really telling. This week, the U.S. and Mexico set a date and a place for their first formal bilateral round. Mexico's at the table, ready to go. Canada hasn't announced a start date yet. On the surface, it might look like Canada's falling behind, and yeah, some opposition voices have been loud about that. But here's the deeper picture. Mexico sends about 80% of its exports straight to the American market. Their economy, their political stability, it's all tightly linked to keeping that flow going. For them, getting to the table fast isn't optional, it's survival. Canada? Different story. We've been quietly building options. New pipelines to Asia, fresh trade deals with partners in Europe, India, Japan, and beyond. Every new investment and diversified route lowers the urgency. Canada's playing the long game, aiming to show up at these talks as the least desperate player in the room. And that strategy seems to be landing. One top U.S. trade official, Jameson Greer, said something in a congressional hearing that really stood out. When asked about Canada aligning with U.S. policy, he noted that Canada is pushing for more trade agreements with more countries. He called it doubling down on globalization while the U.S. tries to fix its problems with it. Think about that. He's not painting Canada as isolated or weak. He's acknowledging that Canada is building its own global network, and it's working. That's not the tone of someone who feels totally in control. He also admitted that key parts of CUSMA are functioning well. that he has a good relationship with Canadian counterparts, and that he's optimistic about getting talks moving. Sounds more like someone who needs a deal to work than someone dictating terms. This isn't Canada's first rodeo with these dynamics. Remember, Canada already made real concessions earlier. We pulled back on counter-tariffs worth billions and even scrapped the digital services tax, hoping it would open doors. Months later, those moves weren't really reciprocated. Washington took the concessions and came back asking for more. That's why the current approach feels grounded in experience. It's not stubbornness, it's learning from what didn't work. The plan now is to keep the remaining cards for a comprehensive negotiation, not hand them over piecemeal. As one minister put it, if Canada wanted a bad deal, it could have signed 1 month ago. Instead, while the entry fee is being demanded and Mexico moves fast, Canada is strengthening its hand. Big LNG investments like Shell's $22 billion commitment, surging oil exports to South Korea and Japan, new pipeline expansions, and a new sovereign wealth fund to back strategic projects. Foreign investment is flowing in at levels not seen in years. On top of that, Carney pulled together a multi-party advisory group with voices from across the political spectrum, including former conservatives. It's a show of unity, sending a clear message to Washington that this is Team Canada negotiating, not just one party. Carney's also staying in touch with Mexico's president, coordinating where it makes sense, even as their timelines differ. A Mexican delegation is even heading to Canada soon. Of course, there are risks. No formal Canada-US talks scheduled yet, and the optics of Mexico moving first could create pressure. If Canada waits too long and Mexico cuts a deal, it might shift the dynamics. But the fundamentals look solid. July 1st isn't a sudden cliff, it's more of a checkpoint in a process that can stretch out. The agreement can renew or trigger reviews that go on for years. Canada has options, and that's leverage. Trump wants that deadline to feel heavy. Carney's bet is that by building alternatives, it doesn't have to. And when you hear the U.S. trade rep criticize Canada for expanding globally, it almost sounds like a backhanded compliment. Those global ties, those energy deals, those partnerships, that's exactly what gives Canada breathing room. So, here's the bottom line. Trump asked for payment up front. Canada said no thanks. Mexico hurried to the table. Canada is building pipelines, sealing investments, and strengthening its position while the clock runs. The country with real options is often the strongest one in the room. This CUSMA story is going to keep evolving right through July 1st and beyond. It's one of the biggest economic files for our generation. If you want clear, straightforward updates on what's really happening, make sure you're subscribed and hit that bell. Drop a comment if you want me to dig deeper on any part of this. Share it with friends who care about how these deals affect jobs, prices, and our future. Thanks so much for watching. Stay informed, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.